afternoon, everyone. We are here representing a big team, as you can see, but only two of us can make it here because of visa problem. We will try our best to represent two projects and big team. So let me try to give you a bigger picture of where these two projects are taking place and how, and then Sophia will be presenting the details. Here is Ethiopia, with 80 different people groups, with 80 different languages, and 100 million people. The first translation, maybe in the introductory presentation you heard here, you've heard that the first translation in Ethiopia took place in the 5th century. That was in Ge'ez. And the second one is in 1500s. But until now, we have many who don't have the Bible in their language. It's not, maybe as you know, in other countries as well, you know, the first translation is considered to be sacred, and you don't want to touch that. So Ge'ez is like that for Ethiopia. And second language, Amharic. So in 2010, also beginning of 2011, leaders of big organizations, church leaders, including SIL, and we have their logos here, 3 churches, Mekane Jesus, Kale Hiwat, and the Evangelical Church Fellowship, Bible Society Ethiopia, and Great Commission, Wycliffe Ethiopia, they all came together to make Vision 2025 a reality in Ethiopia. So at that time, we had 50 languages considered to be remaining who needed a Bible translation. So they all were, in one or the other way, involved in Bible translation. But after their coming together legally as Ethiopian CP, then it was Ethiopian Comprehensive Plan, but now Ethiopian Collaborative Partnership for Bible Translation. They brought together their strength for effectiveness. 3 of them, as I mentioned, are churches, very big churches that represent about 20% of the population. And the other are para-church organizations, as you know. And also the Orthodox and the Catholic Church are also part of this collaboration. So this is our leading verse. I was like wondering, should I put this in the slide or not? And she told me, this is the only verse we have. Yeah. So let's read it. Then will I purify the lips of the people, that all of them may call on the name of the Lord and serve him shoulder to shoulder. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, my scattered people will bring offerings. So this is our leading verse. So as I told you, under the CP, we're working, all the partners in Ethiopia are working to making Vision 2025 a reality in Ethiopia. But we have challenges. And some of the challenges are lack of literacy and Muslim-dominated communities, not having orthography, and things like that. So with all the challenges, now we're talking about 10 languages remaining. God has helped us so far. But 2, which we're going to talk now in a few minutes, Berlanta and Guamlang, which are their pseudonames, are found in the boundaries of Ethiopia, in the pinkish boundary, the western part of Ethiopia. They're cross-border languages and highly Muslim-dominated languages and with less literacy rate. And so the OBT has given us opportunity to reach these people as well. Mm-hmm. So the Berlanta and Guamlang, as you can see, they are pseudonyms. Real names are Berta and Guamma projects. They have 6 translators each. And the translators have OBS background, they have OBS experience, so that is a very good thing they've brought to the project. And the community checkers, we have few community checkers, they change through each coming together, and we have back translators, 1 for each project. and translation advisors. One for each team, that means 4 in total. 2 of them, they have the oral Bible storytelling background, but 2 of them only with translation background. And consultants with no OBS background. I'm mentioning this because it will come back again as a challenge. So we met 3 times for the past 1 year since the project began, and all 3 of them are workshop bases in the city because of mainly facility. So we come together for 3 weeks. We work on translation. They take back their recordings to their community, and then they come back. So in this process, we have heard fascinating stories in only 1 year that encouraged us to go on and also encourage the translators. So I'll come back to tell some stories, but now, Sophia.
Okay, I am the advisor for the Berta team, or when you see it in written, it will be Berlanta, as Zetseat explained, because of the sensitivity of the project, because of its being a Muslim communities, and so we have to protect our translators. And although I am a Berta advisor, I want to start by speaking to you about some specific things that the Guama project faced. And after that, I will speak more about Berta. But I should say that also the things that I will be telling you about Berta, it applies to the Guama team. But first of all, here are some people from the Guama team. To the left, you see Simret, she is an advisor. In the middle, Rebuma, he's also an advisor. And then on the third picture, you see some of the translators and community checkers who, at the end of the second workshop, receives some SD cards with the recordings. So a celebration time for us. Okay, during our first workshop in December last year, the Guama team sat down, they went through the internalization process, and then when they started to record, they ran into a problem. It seems like the translators were not agreeing on what the Guama language is. So there was a dialect issue. There is a highland dialect and a lowland dialect, and after some time it actually started to get quite nasty. Like they weren't, like this is not Guama, this is Guama. So we brought in some linguistic staff from SIL who has specialized on this language. And she, and together with some people from the management team, they were able to sort things out. So we're friends again, thank God. And they sat down and they chose the lowland dialect. And that is because that is the dialect that has most Muslims. And that's the community that we want to reach the most. And another reason for choosing the lowland was that the highland already had some OBS going on in their dialect, but the lowlanders had nothing. So that's why we decided that. Then there was a second challenge that was specific for Guama. It's a very small people group. It's about 15,000 speakers, whereas Berta is over 200,000 speakers. So the advisors noticed that when they translated, everything it was so slow and with long pauses. And they said, do they really have Guama as their first language? And some of them didn't. They had the Oromo, which is the language of wider communication in that area. That was their mother tongue rather than Guama. So then started a hunt, for good mother tongue translators. And we have seen a lot of process there because during the second workshop, some community checkers came in and the advisors thought, wow, they're really good in their language. This is like their mother tongue speakers. We should use them as translators instead. So during this process, we've seen a lot of progress. The church that we're partnering with is also they're hesitant of using Muslims as translators. So that also, as you understand, really narrows the scope of who we can choose to be a translator. Okay, that was a little bit about the Guama, but I remind you that what I will tell you about the Berta team will apply also to the Guama, at least most of it. Here we are. On this picture you see 6 translators, 1 back translator, 3 community checkers, and 2 advisors. And if you look in the middle at the back, there's a man that is a little bit older than the translators. He has a red shirt. He is Gergera. He's a community checker. He's the first Christian of the Berta community. So everyone regards him as their father. And I will say something interesting in the community checking about that, how that plays in too. During this presentation, I will share some opportunities and some challenges that we've had. And you probably will recognize some of it, because it's now our 2nd day of this conference. So it's going to be interesting to see how much you think you've heard already before. I will focus on 2 specific, I could speak about a lot of things, but I will focus on 2 or 3 specific points that I want to bring up for discussion. Okay, about the opportunities. It is a new Bible translation. Praise God. This is a community that has nothing in orally or written of the Bible so far. So it's a great opportunity, and the translators are so excited and motivated and engaged in this project. It's also, of course, an opportunity for language development. If you have something recorded in your language, of course, the status of the language will rise. And we have really found during these 3 workshops that we've had that the oral method really promotes naturalness in the translation. And we are very excited about that. And we actually think that it can be, as I think it was Dirk in just earlier today, who was talking about how that can also bring some new fresh ideas or perhaps reminders to the written process. Because I know that a lot of written translations also uses some oral methods. But I think it's a good reminder, and we're very excited about the high degree of naturalness. Here we are at a consulting checking. To the right, you have Warku. He's one of our consultants. We have 2 consults. What's the word? Consultants, thank you. I'm like, this is not right. And here we are discussing some passages in Genesis. I should have told you we're doing Genesis. And they're so engaged, and it gets really animated sometimes. We've noticed as advisors that these translators are not afraid to disagree or to come up with ideas, and that has really been a good thing for the project. Especially one time but it's still respectful, I should say. It's respectful and like a positive atmosphere, yeah. It got specifically animated when we were discussing in Genesis 9, chapter 6, the image of God, this image or resemblance. Now, in Berta language, there's no general term. You have to choose, is it physical resemblance or is it inner characteristic resemblance? And they were debating, and then this Gergera, the father of them all, as they're saying, he said, why can't they be both? How do we know? How do we know how we resemble God? Maybe we should put both of the words in there, which is actually also what the Translators' Workplace was suggesting. So, but they will call, like if they're not sure, we have to call that guy, or we have to call that lady to get some input. So they're really involving the whole community, which of course we're very happy about. Okay, now moving towards the challenges. The first three here I will speak about in more depth soon, so I'm leaving them for the time being. But on our last workshop, it was just a month ago, two of the translators, oh, there's a presidential, somebody did, shame on you. No. Maybe you can hear me anyway. I'll continue. Okay. Two of the translators came to me and they said, and this is a very Berta way of doing it, Sophia, we have to ask you something tomorrow. And because they're so gentle and soft, you know, so then I was prepared that tomorrow they will bring me a question, you know. Okay, I said, okay. And then the day after, they approached me and I approached them because I knew that something was coming. And then they said, we don't have any women on our team. And you know, oh, yeah, I've noticed. And then they said, you know, it's very difficult for us to evangelize when we don't have any women, because we can't simply walk into a house where there's a woman working in the kitchen or like inside of the home or in her kitchen area outside of the house or something and just start talking to her. There will be rumors. Oh, yeah, of course. So that has been a challenge for the project that we're trying to find a solution to, either to bring in some community checkers that are women. We need women. Yeah. Okay. Yesterday, I was so happy to listen to Sebastian Flor. I don't know if I translate if I say your name right. Okay. Because one of the major points that we want to bring out here for discussion is this tension that we felt between orality and orality principles on the one side and translation with all its, you know, accuracy, clarity, acceptability, and those principles on the other side. But what Sebastian actually said that, oh, there's already a lot of different things going on, and some people call this OBS, when other people will label it OBT, and so it looked promising to us that this discussion or this tension is actually, it's everywhere, and we just have to live with it somehow. Okay, when we were introduced to the oral method and keeping things oral and internalization, we were excited about it, and when we started to internalize in the different groups, it went really well. We used pictures, we used some drama, we talked about exegetical choices. We did do some analytical approach there too. We made them retell in Berta, and we discussed key terms and all these things. And that went really well. Then we moved into the recording phase. And then it was difficult because we found that no matter how many times we tried, the recording didn't turn out the way we were hoping it to turn out. We missed something, we omitted something, deleted something, there was a long pause, the translators drew a blank, all kinds of things that we were struggling with, really struggling with. So we had to re-record it many times, and then after a while we say, okay, never mind, we will send it to the peers now. And the peers came with their feedback. We listened to that feedback, we re-recorded it, and the same thing happened. And this, of course, especially applied to the long passages. Some shorter passages, we could manage them. But for the really long passages, we were struggling so much. So we couldn't reconcile the tension of the tension that we felt between orality and translation. We were like, because the consultants were like, no, we're not happy with this. You didn't put this here, or this is not accurate enough to be called a translation. So this is where we really struggled. So during the second workshop, we said, okay, we have to do something. We have to try something out, you know? And that is what we did. And here is where I want to put in also a quote from Dirk Kroneman, who had a presentation earlier this morning. And he said, do we have to choose in OBT, do we have to choose between an analytic or holistic approach? No, we can have both. That's what he said. And in our context, that really worked out. So let me tell you what we did. We started out orally. And I think that we have to do that. There's no way, if we want it to be natural, one of the SIL Ethiopia consultants, a really senior one, Mary Breeze, she's a British lady, she once told me, and I've kind of taken that to my heart, it's better if you have a natural draft and then you bring accuracy to that draft than having an accurate draft and trying to make it natural. Because that is not, you can't do that. So we thought, okay, we're not going to worry about the details. We're just going to get the language flowing. Let's just get the language flowing. And here is a video. I will show you what this looks like. This is Daniel, one of our translators. He is here drafting Genesis chapter 41. It is when Pharaoh is describing his dreams to Joseph. I think that was the passage. Oh. Oi. Is that volume up? Okay. Yes? Ah. Is the volume up here?
I think so.
Oh, it's muted. Sorry. Oh, okay. That was why. Thank you. Okay, here we go. Right. Exactly. This reminds us of Ethiopia. Okay.
Lali dijina sadi haja jibtiyo romongoro jinamba adi wada hala wamidi mbagi dare mama dare maramwalu jinne dia rombadi madina gundi mongoro rohulongmbadi.
That was a little example of how we do the drafting. We use a lot of pictures. It really works for these translators. They have pictures in front of them, and you see how engaged they are. And then you see the other guys are and also Zetseat, they're like watching and they're listening so well. And then they say, what if you say it like this? What if you say it like that? And we don't open any books, of course, and we don't write. So we really want to maintain and cherish the orality here. It is proved to be very good. Then after that, well, I should say one thing we added. We used a little knife. Whoever was in render, who was here when Joshua was talking about render, he said, let's not talk about the knife. But if you want to know about the knife, you can come to me. Because we used the knife. It was good. So what it actually does is that if you think that the passage is too long, you can cut the source text into more manageable chunks. And you can choose where to cut it so that it makes a natural break. And that really served us well. So that was the only thing we altered in the method during this first step. Then we made some changes. When we sent it to peer review and they sent it back to us, we didn't do a re-recording at that time because we found that it was so time-consuming and also that we knew that we had to do it again later because of community checking and because of consultant check. So we said, let's just write down what their comments. So here we did use a pen. We wrote some things down. I should also mention something that I forgot. We did write down key terms. I have written them so far in a Word document, but I think we're going to start using paratext actually, because it's so good to keep track of the key terms. And yeah. Okay, and then we didn't change so then we used the same oral draft as we had in the beginning, which had to be kind of good then, for the community check. And then we gathered their comments. We wrote them down. And then we actually, but here I think we have to do it we have to change that. We used the same also for the consultant check. But if you can understand, I mean, that wasn't so easy with the consultant. So I think we have to do a redrafting, incorporating the peer review comments and the community check comments, and then give that to the consultant, because of course it will be too much job, too much of work for the consultants. So we have to change that, I think. And then, so still, the only thing recorded we had was the first oral draft, which we're quite happy with it. And then we had a lot of comments. So what we did then is that we played the oral draft and we wrote it down. And we incorporated the ideas from the different reviewers. And then for the final recording, they read. And they were able to do that because they're very literate. They can read fluently, the translators, and they're also familiarized with the texts. It was not like it was new to them. So they could read, as you saw Daniel crafting the story, he could read it like that. And we did that in order to, we chose this method in order to pay attention to both the naturalness and cherishing the orality principles, but also paying attention or cherishing the accuracy and the clarity and those principles. So we found that it worked very well in our context. Okay, a question that came up during, like, the more and more we worked with it, and it actually also when Sebastian was giving his presentation yesterday, and it's a funny thing to do because we're doing oral Bible translation, and here I am asking, what is an oral Bible translation? But it actually, I think it is a legitimate question. How is it different from recording a written translation? What is the style? These are questions that I feel that our team needs to kind of engage more with. And especially the second point, how should the existing oral traditions in the community affect our translation? Because I do think that they need to be affected by the oral traditions that are already existing. I feel that we need to go out and listen to the community. What are the traits, the features that Sebastian was talking about yesterday? What are the oral features? What about pitch? What about pauses? What about... We have yet to discover those things. And we consider it, I think, at least the two of us, we consider it more and more important to engage more in this. Okay. Now, here I also want to start with a quote from one of the brothers that was presenting this morning, Brian Harmelink. Very fascinating presentation, I have to add. He said this: what linguistics facilitates translation? And that is the question that has been in the back of our mind during all this project. What linguistics would help the translators to actually do a better translation? Because we don't want to teach or talk about linguistics that is not relevant to them. But what linguistics would actually make our translation better? And I do think that the translators need training. We have given them some translation principles. We have a very good instructor in Ethiopia that's talked about, figures of speech, and I think it's been, it hasn't been out of context. I think he's done that in a good way. But I think that we need to remember that the mother tongue speakers, yes, they have speaker intuition, as any mother tongue speaker. But because this activity of translation also involves a source text that you interact with all the time, and a source text that we think of as holy, that speaker intuition needs to be shaped into translation knowledge. And how do we do that? How can we help them to separate meaning from form and such things? There are three, as I see it, as we have seen it in our project, three good things about teaching grammatical knowledge, or teaching like discourse or discover your grammar. And the first one is that I think it gives translators confidence and self-esteem. We had one point where there's so many quotes in Genesis. There's quotes in quotes. There's even quotes in quotes in quotes. So and that's not easy to grasp. And I was trying to, I wanted to make sure that they weren't too influenced from the source text, that they were quoting in a way that was natural to their language. And so I tried to explain what a quote was, and then after a while I felt, I need some help here. So I brought in a linguist with SIL Ethiopia, and then she explained it to them, and she was so good in giving examples, and she did a really good job. And after a while they understood what she was talking about. And their faces, they were so happy. They're just shown, the others should have been here. Oh, is this okay? So our language can do this? Because in our setting in Ethiopia, there's all of this majority culture play that comes into play. The people group that we're talking about, and you will hear it perhaps also in the impact stories, they feel inferior to the majority cultures. They feel they don't have self-esteem. Our language is not a real, it's a bit like that. But when they learn things about their language and they can compare it to the other languages that they know, they get so happy, and you can see how they rise up. They get self-esteem. So that kind of knowledge was great. The second thing is that it facilitates the interaction between translators and advisors. And with that, I mean, we share a language. If we have the terminology, or that I was taught this morning to rather speak of concepts, perhaps. Perhaps that was more about key terms. But if we share a terminology, it's easier for us to discuss the translation. I have an example. I had done a little bit of, between the translation sessions, I had taught some Discover Your Grammar things. And one day, I don't know why I did that, but later I found out that it was God's timing. I had just talked about the first, second, and third person. And what is that, I explained that to them, and then the next day, we came into Genesis 9. It's about God's covenant. And God speaks about the covenant with Noah and with all his descendants. And sometimes God says, this is the covenant between me and you. And sometimes it says, this is the covenant between God and you. And then it came in so handy to be able to say, hey, here you need to use, in verse 16, it's actually third person. Oh, okay. And then they got that and then we were able to continue. So it really served us to have a common language, to discuss the language back and fro. And then it puts focus on naturalness and therefore increases quality of the product. Yes. And this is where I wanted to speak about the discourse features. In Genesis 9:9, the Lord is saying, I myself am hereby establishing my covenant. So it's a very strong I, and it's shown in the Hebrew. It's marked prominence there. It's not only the suffix on the verb that marks the I, but it's actually a pronoun. But when I heard the translators translate, I kept hearing, and that's the only verse in this chapter where God is really emphasizing I. And all of the rest, it's just like, I did this, I did that. Not emphasizing himself. It's not I myself, or as for me, or something like that. But I kept hearing them saying the first singular pronoun, Ali, Ali, Ali. And then I said, and then we discussed that. Do you have to have that pronoun there? What if I take it away? What will it do? You can take it away. Okay. So what's the difference? And then it turned out, just like Hebrew and many other languages, if you have the pronoun there, it's more like I am, like strong I. And so the way that they had translated this was like I, all the time, marked prominence, and that wasn't very true to the source text. It wasn't natural also. It's like, why is he really angry, or what's going on? So when we found that out, I was very excited, because it made the translation better. Something that's also have constant bad conscience about is this foreground background. This is one of the most important features of a story. What is foregrounded in the story? What happens on the scene? And what is backgrounded? What are things that are just reasons or something that had happened before the story started? We have not discussed that yet, and we have to do that. So we have to focus on those discourse things. Okay, I finally come to this suggestions. This concerns both the software and also some people who are doing training, and also for the teams, the practitioners ourselves. When it comes to the software, I'm excited for the Render 2.1. There's some really good improvements and some really useful things that we will see in that version. But something that we have been really hoping to get, and we will see what happens, is a pause button on the recorder. Because what happens is that sometimes the translators, they go and they do it so well, and then all of a sudden they draw a blank. And you can see their faces freeze. It's like, oh, no. If they could hit pause there, and then reset. Okay, this is now, because sometimes the passage has 2 parts or something. If they could pause, okay, what was it? Okay, now it was this part of the story, and then hit play again, or record again. That would be great. It will solve a lot of problems for us, I think. And also now we have a possibility to cut in the recording, in the source text. But perhaps if we could have a way of cutting in the recordings themselves, and also like editing the recordings, that would be swell. And I already talked about more training in orality and oral method. And I mean everyone, from the translators up to the consultants. Also the consultants. Because if the advisors and the translators have all kinds of good knowledge about orality, and then you come to the consultant, and the consultant is like, no, this is not right here, you have to change it, then it's no use. So we have to have the whole range of, yes, that would be, we need that, and I'm not sure how that is going to happen and how we can make that happen together, but that's something that we see would be useful. And the discourse training, I talked about it already. And then a suggestion, or maybe a recommendation for translation teams, is to involve paratext. And that's also a recommendation to myself, because I haven't done that yet. But as the translation is growing and you're getting more and more, it's less and less manageable, I feel. So that would be really, that would be good, I think. A good call. Now we're going to hear some exciting impact stories.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. In stories, we talk about untold stories of God in communication in general. that implies to what God has done, but it's not yet reported, it's not yet told for others to acknowledge. God has done a lot in Ethiopia, a lot. So OBT is one way that we have seen God working among us, and we heard the report through the translators. And not only in the community through the recordings, but also we had the opportunity to see that among the translators as well. As we mentioned before, there is hierarchy, which is not good, based on religion, based on race, and Christianity is considered to be the high religion in Ethiopia, and those who are privileged have the written word of God, and those who are not, who are lowly, don't have it. So you can imagine these people, they don't have it, so they are lowly, and they look up to other communities. I remember once we were reading a passage, and we saw one of the translators weeping, and we started crying with him because of just the passage that was read. And you can imagine what happens when the passage goes out, the scripture goes out to the community. So basically it builds up the people. It builds up their identity to what it should be. Not to look others down, of course, but to have the right understanding of themselves. Not based on their race or their educational level, but just as human beings. So let's just present you two highlights from different point of views. One is from the person, Georgera, whom she mentioned, the first believer among the Berta people. He said, "This is an answer to my prayers." And the other very interesting, very encouraging thing we heard from the translators is that one of the Berta speakers said, after hearing the recording, "If you continue doing this, we will come to worship with you in our language." So the language, the strength of the language and the maturity of the language is it's having the word of God in its own. So this is really amazing. And that also develops the people's self-esteem. So I hope this is a very good ending and also reminds me to be thankful of all those people who are behind this, who are not here from Ethiopia, and also we didn't know of before coming here. Yeah, so thank you all for contributing to this.
Thank you very much, Sophia and Zetseat, to bring the projects in Ethiopia closer to us, but also even that you are so honest to bring everything up, what's happening in the project, that we get a clear understanding, and even if there are challenges, you bring it with so many enthusiasm, and you feel the love for the people there that you really want to continue. We thank you very much. And the floor is open to ask questions. There are papers on the chairs on the side. If you don't want to speak, you can write it down and the people will pick it up and read it for you. But if there is a question.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, helpful. You made an interesting assertion, kind of indirectly, that it promotes a high degree of naturalness, and yet you should still do discourse analysis. I don't know if you want to say any more of it with those two concepts together, but that's one of my takeaways from this, is that you still need to do the good linguistic analysis. So,
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dale. That's a very good question. It's a bit, can be a bit contradictory, perhaps. I think my answer to that would be, it does promote, the oral method does promote naturalness, because it starts, I mean, you are not so concerned about, okay, here's my source, here's my pen, okay. this word, this meaning, writing down. No, you start to listening to the whole set. And then it makes a big deal out of this that you should retell it. So then you understand if they have understood the story. And then I think because they have really asked us to focus on the Berta in the first stage, rather than, and not care so much about the details. I remember that from our first workshop. Of course, we can't tell a completely different story, but to let go of some of the, let's not worry about if we leave some things behind. Let's just try to find those good words and those good expressions. So I think when it comes to I think it does promote, but I don't see a contradiction between doing that to promote naturalness and do another thing that promotes naturalness. And that is to actually find out what the language, what kind of options the language have, like when it comes to different tenses, aspects, how to relate clauses to each other, and to discover that. Because I do think that any person would be influenced by the source text. So there will be things in the draft you're doing that is not very idiomatic in your own language. So I see both of these things as they can go together. Yeah.
Does it satisfy you? Okay. There's another question.
Yeah, I was just thinking of tying it into you with an example, if that's all right. I was at a workshop one time, it was in Mozambique, where a lady actually was doing a census workshop of the senses that the people have, smell, taste, and everything else. I said, well, come on, everybody knows you have your senses. Yeah, but do we really have it in awareness so we can start use it more in a directive way and purposeful? And out of that workshop, when they're experiencing their senses, it was not that they didn't have these senses, but they start to realize the potential that God had given them with it. And I think in that way, that whole perspective you're talking about, if you bring that out as an awareness, then it helps people to more purposeful realize the potential that what is in their culture, their language, their way of communicating. Does that help? Maybe.
Thank you.
There's another question. Oh, here. One by one.
What you said at the beginning about the fact that this is primarily a Muslim people group, and if I understood you right, but yet you're working with a group of translators. Could you comment a little more on how that works, or how you've found ways to incorporate Muslims in the translation process and do it in a somewhat open way?
We don't have Muslim translators.
Really?
Yeah, but the area is Muslim community, but we mainly work with most local churches there. So in both areas we have churches. We have churches, but a very small group. And then mainly speakers of other languages. They're not really from that community. So we try to, in the first presentation, I tried to show a group of churches that are leading this project, almost all projects, Bible translation projects in Ethiopia. So they try to make sure that there is a local community there, a local committee there that represents all dialects, all believers. So through them, we get to have believers. Even the community checkers are believers because it's the church that owns it, and it's very difficult for the church to get involved with Muslim translators.
Okay, thank you again for your presentation. You were talking about the length of the sets and needing to cut them. Within Render, you have the set, and you can break those up into passages. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a little more as far as the length of these passages, or did you break them up into passages? These sets, did you break them up into passages? And how big did you find was a good length for those passages?
Yes. So the sets, as you're saying, they are already divided in passages. But we found that sometimes even the passages were too long for us. So let's take an example from the Joseph story. That was one good passage for us. I think it was 4 or 5 verses, the beginning of Genesis 37. 4 or 5 verses we managed well. But longer than that, we often cut them so that they were maximum about 5 verses, normal verses. Yeah.
Please, thank you very much for this very exciting presentation. Now, you raise several points. I don't know whether they are issues, but points for discussion. And I know they may not be discussed in this very short time, but I wish just to make an attempt to make remarks on one of them. And that is on the difference between a audio recorded translation from a written and the oral Bible translation. Now, I don't know if I can be so fast, but let me bring it to myself. When I was a translator, because we had been taught that you first try to put your translation in oral. So I would try to do that, but later on, I only could do another step which we were told, get the big picture. And get the big picture and then translate. Now, in that now was common because the steps are understand the text and then translate. So in understanding, get a big picture and then translate. Now, I would try to read either the chapter or the whole book if it is short, get the big picture, and then start transputting in my language. But I would get that whole big picture, place it aside, and start cutting down the text into, if it is the book, chapter, and then verses, and then start a very vigorous exercise of reading resources in English, in other languages which are easy for me, and trying to get the meaning and put that meaning in my language. And somewhere on the way, I don't know, you remember, if you are here, I try to say that I would get very unnatural things in there. Because of this vigorous searching in commentaries and other languages, I would just lose my own language. And that was all the time there. in all the books I translated. Now, I call that an intrinsic problem with written translation, which you can't run away from as long as you will do the same practice. It's intrinsic. Now, the only very recent way I can now avoid the intrinsic problem, because I became consultant, and I was saying the same thing to the translators. Is this natural in your language? And he says, I didn't know we had written like that. I didn't know. And I realized this comes in unawares. And so I'm struggling with trying to take the written at this same level of naturalness when you audio record it with the orally translated. I don't know whether am I making sense? If that one has come in with intrinsic problems, things which you can never run away from because of the method you are using, because the method forces you to do them unawares. Now, that one cannot have equal quality of naturalness with the one where the mind of you, the translator, is getting this whole big picture in the natural way and keep on improving on that big picture with what you had not filled in until the whole text, whether it is a chapter or a whole book, is done. So I don't know. It's difficult for me to explain, but now that's what my newfound joy of naturalness, which I don't know if we can attain with the audio, even if it is in the same format audio, but it might not really attain the same naturalness. Excuse me.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that again. I heard you saying this morning, and I'm glad you mentioned it again because I have it in my mind since you said it. We have this natural tendency to repeat what we're listening to, and yeah, I think that's why we brought up having the discourse analysis or discover your grammar training, at least to bring that to our conscious mind, that we might be tempted to adopt, to make that an open discussion. Since we have two teams, we were also discussing to have it together for all the translators to freely say, this is how we do it, and then to be able to compare with each other. And they say, this is how we do it, but this is our source language does it. And maybe that would help them to be conscious, at least. I'm not saying that this would be a perfect remedy, but at least to help them be conscious of the temptation.
From what I understood, your audience that you're doing this for are Muslims. Is that right? But your translators are all Christians. So how do you avoid having churchy language that turns the Muslims off? And are you picking key terms that speak to Muslims, or are you tied to using the terms the church uses?
Thank you. That's a good question. Yes, it's a difficult one. The first thing I want to say a little of a community feedback that came back from the Berta community. When the translators made people listen to the recordings, or when they showed the recordings, or the Muslims who they were playing the recordings to, they say, "Why? This is really good. Can't you translate the Quran?" Which says something also about the Muslim community. I mean, normally a Muslim wouldn't say translate the Quran, right? Because it's untranslatable. But they really like, because this is about Yusuf. We have that in the Quran. This is about, we have these people, Jacob and, you know. So they were very positive to it. Now, the reason why there, of course, it's a sensitive issue, and some people would say that, of course, you should have Muslim community checkers, and of course, but in our setting, it's difficult because of the churches we cooperate with. So we have to be wise there. So we will do what the committee chooses. When it comes to the key terms and all of that, some of the translators have Muslim background at least. So it's not that they are born in Christian. I mean, it's such a small minority. So some of them have been have converted to Christianity in the most spectacular ways, actually. But I also want to bring the question of acceptability, because if we don't have the churches on our sides, it's not going to work. We need the churches to work. We need to work alongside of them. This is actually the SIL setting I've heard, or the Ethiopia setting, I should say. It's quite unique that we're really trying to make broad alliances. We're not, SIL is never initiating any projects, but it's always under the ownership of the church and other organizations. So we are only a partner. We are a technical partner. So there are some limits to what we can influence. But we need to think about the acceptability, that the church is a very important partner that we partner with, and we cherish them, and they have the ownership of the product. But we do understand, it is problematic. It's not easy. You pointed to something that can be a weakness.
Would you be willing to talk a little bit more about how you're doing your community checking?
Okay. Yes, the community checking. We have had the same 3 checkers with the Berta team. What we do is that we bring we do them together. So there are 2 translations team, and they work on different translations. With the community check, we bring everyone together in one team with the community checkers and the advisors, of course. And then we play according to the render process. We play the recording to them. We have struggled a little bit to get them to retell. We're hoping that will become easier with time, because I think they see it as something they need to accomplish. You know, the community checkers, they get in their culture, they get scared or embarrassed when they feel like when they're failing or whatever. And no matter what we've tried, no, just try. For them, this is difficult. It's very difficult. So the retelling, I think we need to work more on that one. But what has worked really well is the community bringing ideas. This Dirjera that we talked about, he's very active. He will point out when he thinks that, no, you have brought Oromo in now. Our language has another way of saying this. Or when there is when there is an expression that he would rather use. So, it's not always easy, because he's a father of the Christian community there. Everyone will, of course, respect him and what he thinks. Sometimes we as advisors could think, well, maybe if there is an Oromo word in here, maybe that is because that's the way they talk, So sometimes we feel that, is he perhaps bringing in a lot of words that is not very commonly used? So there's this balance of respecting him and his knowledge and honoring him, but also trying to sometimes, how do young people say this? Would a 5-year-old understand this word? Sometimes we try to challenge him, but we really have to do that wisely. So that is basically what we do during the community check. We make them retell, and then they just come with ideas. They do that very naturally. And I'm very amazed by that. I thought that they would be more like, yes, this is perfect. Yes, this is perfect, as we have heard it worked in some other communities. But they will have ideas. They will have suggestions. Yeah.
both community check and consultant checking happen in the same room with the translators?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just trying to compare two methods for recording that have happened here today. During the demonstration, when Joshua called Hervé here to record, he was asking him, do you want to listen to the set one more time? Do you want to listen to the set one more time? So that Hervé could internalize that and, you know, do the whole set at once. And you're asking for a pause, okay? A pause button where someone can pause, then continue. Don't you think your method will interfere with the natural flow for the recording?
Yes, that is definitely a threat. Like, that is a risk, a risk. So we have to be careful about that. But we do think that sometimes there are natural pauses even within one passage. The passage that we saw Ivre do this morning, it was very short and there was no natural break in there. But other passages are not like that. Other passages are longer and have like two components to them. So they're more suitable to pause. I mean, you can do it. In a passage like that, maybe that is more difficult. But yes, I will not put under the carpet. Is that Swedish? We say put under the carpet to hide. I will not hide the fact. Okay, I will not sweep under the carpet that there is a risk. Yes, it can affect the natural flow. Yes.
Yeah, I would encourage you not to put the pause button in there, and if that's the situation, to use the divide function. What I found in some of our recordings in storytelling, that when they find the pause button, they will read a sentence, record it, pause, read a sentence, record it, pause, and shortcut the internalization process. It would be much better to have an edit function, which is coming next year. Have an edit function where if you mess up and you brain freeze or something, you just keep going and then come back and cut that out. Or if you mess up, pause, start back again, and then you can cut that section out. That would be a much better solution, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. I understand that you are writing down the translation and then record the translation as it is being read. I've done quite a few projects myself, and I've considered going this road. But of course there is a danger that you lose some of the oral features again. As you teach people to read the translation, can you tell something about the training? Do you use dramatic reading? How do you teach people? Because reading can be quite boring.
Thank you. So you're right, and that has been something that we've considered. On the movie, the film that we showed, you see how engaged he is when he's learning and he's looking at the pictures. And I cannot promise that all of that is preserved, all of that engagement is preserved when they read. I've talked to, like, he usually, one of the translators is usually one to record it, because he's good at that. He will stand up, he'll be free, you know, and we have to do it several times. Because of reasons of, like, he reads, like, maybe there's something wrong, or he skips a line, or there can be things like that. But I think we're trying to really enforce, or like to tell him to be free, you know, and to not read like especially in Ethiopia, there's a way of reading that's quite perhaps influenced by the church. It's quite it's like that, and to not do it in that style, but to actually tell the story. and that the transcription is only there for his memory's sake. It's not there so that he reads it, but it's there so that he doesn't forget anything. As I said, I can't promise that that all the drama or everything that he's making when he's drafting it, that we're going to preserve that when he reads it. There's probably something lost. Yes. And that is the balance that we're trying to, that we're like on the tightrope, you know, where we don't want to fall on one side. It's definitely not easy. But we probably, we should work more on that too.
The re-recording is, in a way, sometimes for the translators frustrating. So they will not be able to accept comments because they're tired of recording it again and again. So they miss just a word or something in between, or someone talk in between. It's not even the fault of the speaker, but someone talks, someone opens the door, and then we have to record again. So this is one of the way we try to keep them encouraged, but at the same time reminding them that they should keep it natural. But since the first drafting is oral, then they at least know what it should sound like. Now, one thing I learned is that even as advisors, we can access what was recorded first. That I didn't know. Then maybe if we can let them hear that, listen to that first before they read, that might help. But it's something new that we learned here.
Thank you. There's one more question. Can we keep that as the last question?
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I just wanted to bring it back to your talk about discourse analysis and grammatical study. And a lot of comments have come up about naturalness and preserving naturalness. So as a linguist and a former English major, I love grammar and I love discourse analysis so much. But my concern would be about, and I'm not arguing against their value, but my concern would be about the balance between imposing what seems like discourse features that you would expect to see or grammatical features that you would expect to see on a text that may come naturally, and you're looking for those. So my question is about safeguarding the balance between features that you're expecting to see, between what naturally comes out and may actually be the correct features. So just, could you speak to that?
Can I just ask you, features that we expect to see, do you mean like from
your discourse analysis or from your grammatical study of the language, something that you may be looking for and expecting?
Right. I think that most discourse features perhaps appear in the biblical text at some point. We would definitely, we're actually planning to have some kind of discourse workshop for our next translation workshop. And then, of course, we will gather from the advisors what are the most urgent problems that we've run into where we're not sure, like what I told you about background and foreground. And we actually have one Berta expert coming in, a linguist that has done studies. It's in another dialect of the language, but she is still a German linguist. So we're hoping we will get the help, and then we can tell her, can you please talk about these issues, these discourse features, because we have already ran into them, or perhaps also anticipate what are the things that we will need for the next text that we're translating, so that we can keep it in a context that we've been talking about in different presentations here at this conference. So we wouldn't choose things that would be irrelevant, but we would choose things that we constantly run into, kind of things. Is that?
Thank you very much for all your questions, and Zetseat and Sophia, continue the good work what you are doing.
Thank you.